The first book of the history of Sanchuniathon. 1. He posits that the beginning of this universe is the dark air, born of spirit, or rather the breath and spirit of the dark air, and chaos, turbid and surrounded by deep darkness. These are also infinite, and have no end except in the long interval of ages. But when the spirit, he says, had begun to burn with love for its principles, and at the same time had been mixed, they called this mutual connection Cupid. This was indeed the beginning of the procreation of all things. Then the spirit began its own procreation, from which conjunction came forth Mot, which some say is slime, others the corruption of the watery mixture, from which the seeds of subsequent production. And indeed the very generation of all things came into being. 2. But there were certain living beings, devoid of all sense, which gave birth to living beings endowed with intelligence, whose name was Zophasmin, the heaven of the contemplators, and who were shaped in the shape of an egg. Immediately Mot, with the sun, moon, stars, and the rest of the great multitude of stars, shone forth. But when the air had given off a fiery splendor, from the burning inflammation of the sea and the land, winds, clouds, and with a great rushing force of heavenly showers and mists came into being. But when all these, which had been separated a little before and were separated from their proper place because of the more intense heat of the sun, converged again into the air, and were committed one to another, they produced thunder and lightning together, at the crash of which the intelligent creatures described before, as if awakened from sleep, and terrified by the horrible noise, began to move. Both men and women, both on land and in the sea. All of which are read in the commentaries of Taoti on the origin of the world, and these indeed he himself devised with arguments and conjectures, which he had foreseen with the keenness of his mind. Then he also passed on their torch to us. But the spirit begat 4 sons, proud and impudent and very swift, who, when they had entered puberty, waged a terrible war for many years, and were not far from destroying the world. To prevent this, his father distributed the world among them in this manner. To Orbius he gave the southern regions, to Typhon the northern, Cadmus the east, and Rachim those which looked towards the setting of the sun. Nevertheless they did not abstain from war, but Orbius made incursions into the kingdom of Typhon, and Typhon into the region of Orbius. The Greeks called Typhon Boreas, and Orbius Notus, and taking many women into marriage, they begat a multitude of strong sons, the winds. 3. Then from the wind Colpia and his wife Bao, by which word the phoenixes signify night, were born Achan and the firstborn, mortal men, from whom Aeon was the author of seeking food from the trees, for which reason these rulers of the earth consecrated the sprouts, and to them, having been placed in the place of the gods, they gave the cult of adoration, to whom not only they, but also their descendants and all their ancestors tolerated life, and performed lower rites and libations, which indeed thoughts of divine worship were in keeping with their weakness and narrowness of mind. From these, Sanchuniathon relates, were born those named Genus and Genia, and inhabited Phoenicia. But when the heat became more intense, they raised their hands to the sky towards the sun, since they believed him to be the only ruler of the sky. For this reason they also called him Beelzebub, the lord of the sky, who is Zeus or Jupiter to the Greeks. For it was not without reason that we thought that these things should be distinguished in many ways, but we have followed various reasons and meanings in this part of the names attributed to things, which the Greeks, being ignorant of, took in a different sense, being led into error by the ambiguity of the meaning. Furthermore, he says that children born from the race of Achan and the firstborn were similarly subject to death, and were called by the names of Luces, Ignis and Flame, who, having discovered fire from the mutual collision of wood, taught men its use. They begot sons who far surpassed the common people in size and stature, whose names were attributed to the mountains which they occupied, whence the mountains Cassius, Libanus, Antilobanus and Brathias took their names from them. The sons of these are Memrumus and Usous and Hypsiranius, who derived such appellation from their mothers, little women who in those times made their fortune most shamelessly in the presence of everyone. But they say that Hypsuranus already inhabited Tyre, and had devised the art of making tigers woven from reeds, rushes and papyrus, and had carried on serious enmities with his brother Usous, who, as a prince, had taken the habit of covering his body with the skins which he had taken from wild beasts which he had captured, when, in a turbulent storm of rain and wind, a fire had broken out from the collision of the trees of Tyre. Usous, though without any example, dared to commit himself to the sea instead of a ship by the tree, the branches of which he had previously cut off. Having also dedicated twin pillars to the fire and the wind, he soon performed the cult of adoration to both, and to those which he had caught while hunting. He poured out the blood of wild beasts. But after all these people had died on the last day, those who remained alive are said to have worshipped the rods and pillars consecrated in their honor and to have celebrated festivals every year with solemn rite. 4. Many centuries later, from the descendants of that Hypsuranus were born the hunter and the fisherman, who discovered the art of fishing and hunting, and later gave their name to the entire order of fishermen and hunters. From the same were born two brothers who discovered iron and the use of iron, one of whose name was Chrysaorus, whom the Greeks translate as Vulcan, devoted much of his work and study partly to eloquence, partly to songs and the arts of divination. He also invented the hook and bait, the fisherman's lime and the improvised rafts, and was the first of all mortals to sail, for which reason they also worshipped him after his death as a god, and called him moreover by the name of Dionysius. Nor are there any who would have it that the method of building walls from bricks was devised by the same brothers. From the same descendants were born two young men, one of whom was called the artificer, the other the terrestrial native. These were the authors of mixing the mud with the bricks, drying both by the heat of the sun and applying it to the roofs of the buildings. They also produced two others, one of whom received the name of Agri, the other Rusticus or Agricola, to whom an image was also dedicated with exceptional worship and a temple in Phoenix, which was carried by several yoked pairs of oxen. Indeed, he is also considered the greatest of the gods by the Biblians. Both of them, moreover, added not only courts to the construction of the buildings, but also walls with caves, which were led into the world. From him, a race of both farmers and hunters, who used dogs, spread, to whom the name Aroni and Tatani was attributed. Their sons were, as is said, Ammonus and Magus, from whom it is said that the methods of raising villages and flocks were received. From these were born Masor and Sydyc, that is, easy and just in solution, who discovered the use of salt. Masori's son Tortus, whom the Egyptians called Thuth, the Alexandrians Thoith, the Greeks Mercury, was the inventor of the first elements in writing. Sidicus had sons, the Dioscuri, or Cabiri, or Corybantes, or finally the Samothracians, whose princes he says invented the ship. From these were other descendants who discovered herbs, and the cure for poisonous bites, and songs. 5. At the same age was born a certain Elian named Altissimus, and also a woman whose name was Baruth, whose domicile was in those places where the city of the Biblians was now built. And they had a son Epigeus or Indigenous, whom they afterwards named Coelus, from whom also that sublime element which revolves above us, they called Coelus, because of its exceptional beauty. He had a sister born to the same parents, whose name was Terra, which they afterwards combined with that which we call Earth because of the singular beauty of her body, whose father Altissimus, when he had perished in a fight with wild beasts, was reckoned among the gods, and was worshipped by his children, with libations and sacrifices. But Coelus, when he had succeeded to his father's empire, married his sister Terra, and by her he had 4 children, Elus, who is also called Saturn, Betulus, Dagon, who is called Situs or the governor of corn, and Atlas. But by other wives he fathered a great multitude of children, which was so grievous and bitter to earth that, inflamed with a more vehement jealousy, he divorced Celis. who had been burdened with many reproaches before. But Silas, although he had departed from him, nevertheless, whenever he pleased, by force, having overcome the fall, would return home again. But he attempted to kill both the children he had received from Ca, and Earth herself, who, having summoned auxiliary forces, often repelled his attack. Meanwhile, when Saturn had reached manhood, with the advice and resources of Mercury Trismegistus, who was himself the author of the tablets and codicils, and wishing to avenge his maternal injuries, he fiercely opposed his father Silas. He also fathered children, Proserpina and Minerva, the former of whom died a virgin. But Minerva, with the help of Mercury and his assistants, Cronus cast for himself a sickle of iron and a spear. Then Mercury vehemently instilled in Saturn's allies the desire to fight against Silas for the earth by means of magical songs. Therefore, armed with these forces, Cronus waged war with his father, expelled the Coke from the borders of his empire, and seized the kingdom. In this struggle, he captured Silas's concubine, for whom he was burning with a singular love, and gave her pregnant in marriage to Dagon, and having conceived a child from Silas, he named her Demeroun. Then Saturn surrounded his temples with a wall and founded the first city of all in Phoenicia, Byblos. But since he suspected his brother Atlas, he buried him in the deep earth at the urging of Mercury. 6. At about the same time the descendants of the Dioscuri, having built rafts and ships, while they were sailing, cast out to Mount Cassius and dedicated a temple there. Now the companions of Elus, who was the same Saturn, they called Eloi, as it were, Saturnians, who were also said to be equal to the same Saturn. Furthermore, Saturn, because something else was suspected of him, slew the son of Sadidus with his sword, and stained his father's hands with the blood of the dead. He also soon beheaded his daughter, so that all the other gods were completely astonished at this idea of Saturn. But while Silas was exiled in the meantime, after some time he sent his daughter Astarte, a virgin, with 2 other sisters, Rhea and Dione, to overthrow Saturn by deceit and treachery. But Saturn, captivated by love and flattery, married both sisters to himself. When Silas heard of this, he ordered Fate and Beauty to undertake an expedition against him with other companions, both of whom Saturn, having charmed him with his own allurements, retained with him. Moreover, the god of heaven discovered Batelia, having wrought living stones with insolent skill. But Astarte bore 7 daughters, the Titanides or Dianas, to Saturn, and Rhea also bore as many sons, the last of whom, as soon as he saw the light, was consecrated. Moreover, from Dion he also bore girls, and from Astarte 2 more males, Cupid and Love. But Dagon, because he had found corn and a plough, was called Jupiter the Aretrius. To Sidicus, whom we interpret as just, one of the Titanides bore Aesculapius. Moreover, to Saturn 3 sons were born in Perea, Saturn, of the same name as his father, Jupiter, Belus and Apollo. Almost equal to these were Pontus Typho and Nereus, the father of Pontus. From Pontus were born Neptune and Sidon. Sidon's voice was so sweet and elegant that the prince discovered the art of singing hymns in tune. From Demeroun, Melicathus, who is also Hercules, is begotten, and soon Silas, joining the side of Demeroun, again makes war on Pontus, from whom he had defected. But Pontus put Demeroun, who had with great force been thrust into his borders, to flight, but he vowed a sacrifice in gratitude for his successful flight. Furthermore, in the 32nd year of his reign, Saturn, when he had captured his father Silas in a certain place in the interior by ambushes, had him amputated in honor of himself near the springs and rivers surrounding him, in which place Silas himself was afterwards consecrated. Then his spirit was dispersed and dissipated, and the blood flowing from the wound dripped into the waters of the nearby springs and rivers. The place is still shown. 7. But when Saturn had departed, the companions of Cael inhabited these places, and were of great authority. About the same time Porus, a newcomer from the east, consecrated a temple to Cael, and pillars to his father Barat, and being carried through this region on a camel, he guarded the sacred places and defended the worshippers of Cael. But Astarte, who is called the Great, Jupiter Demeron, and Adonis, king of the gods, reigned in that region with the consent of Saturn. Astarte placed on her head, as a sign of her kingdom, the head of a bull, and when she was traveling around the world, she found a star that had fallen from the sky and consecrated it on the holy island of Tyre. However, the Phoenicians remember that this same Astarte was Venus. But Saturn, while he was surveying the world, gave the kingdom of all Attica to the daughter of Minerva. And moved by the cruelty and destruction of a terrible pestilence, he sacrificed his son, whom he had taken from his only legitimate wife, to his father Cael, completely consumed by flames. Then he circumcised his own honor, and by force compelled all his companions to do the same. Not long after, he consecrated his son Muth, whom he had begotten by Rhea, after his death, whom the Phoenicians sometimes call Death, sometimes Pluto. Then Saturn gave the city of Byblos to the goddess Baltes, who was also called Dione, and Berytus as a gift to Neptune and the Cabiri, and to the agriculturists and fishermen, where they consecrated the relics of Pontus. But the god Tortoise, having already previously fashioned an image of heaven, soon depicted Saturn as well as the faces of Dagon and the other gods, and each one expressed the sacred characters of the elements. He even devised a symbol of his kingdom for Saturn, with 2 eyes on his face and as many on the back of his head, 2 of which seemed to be blinking peacefully. Also twin wings on each shoulder, of which 2 were unfolded, but 2 were contracted and lowered. And he wanted Saturn to be signified by the symbol of the eyes, both to see while sleeping, and to sleep while awake. And of the wings, both to fly while resting and to rest while flying. But to the other gods, wings in he attributed only 2 shoulders, since they would follow Saturn himself in flight. To the head of the same Saturn he attached twin wings, one of which indicated the primacy of the mind, the other the power of feeling. 8. But Saturn, when he came to the principality in Notus, created the god Thavtus king of all Egypt. And these princes of all Cabirus, the 7 sons of Sidicus, with the 8th brother of Aesculapius, by the command of Thavtus himself, had recorded in commentaries and tables. But the son of Thabian, the first interpreter of the sacred books among the Phoenicians from all memory, having fabricated the same with certain allegories, with the affections of natural things and of those which happen everywhere in this world, he delivered them to the prophets celebrating orgies and the princes of sacrifices and mysteries, who afterwards left this empty ostentation, which they had tried to increase with all hope and all diligence, to their successors and initiates also, one of whom was a certain Osiris, the inventor of the 3 letters, the brother of that Chna, who was the first afterwards called Phoenix. 9. But the Greeks, men of a more refined and elegant intellect than other nations, at first claimed most of these as their own. But when they wished to please the ears and minds with the pleasure of fables, they later exaggerated them beyond measure with new and manifold additions of commentaries, as it were ornaments. And hence Hesiod and the cyclic poets, with whose fables everything resounds, invented for themselves certain contests and castrations of the giants and titans, which, when they threw out here and there, they suppressed the truth itself. But our ears, accustomed from their infancy to their fictions, and occupied with opinions propagated through many centuries, once they have received the vanity of fables, guard them like some deposit, as I said at the very beginning, which from that very time has acquired strength, and has so confirmed its possession that it is very difficult to shake it off. And now the truth itself is taken for trifles, and adulterous and spurious narratives are taken for truth.